Welcome to the Power of Reading, a book review program that discusses the latest Catholic books. A book is a dream you hold in your hand. This program is prepared for Radio Maria Nairobi and presented to you by the Daughters of St. Paul.
Hello, dear listeners, and welcome once again to the Power of Reading program, a book review program here at Radio Maria Nairobi, a Christian voice in your home. And I'm your host and presenter, Sister Beatrice from the Daughters of St. Paul. And we continue our journey together, reviewing very beautiful Catholic, classical, latest books as we continue to grow our culture and to promote the reading culture among ourselves, because we believe that reading has a good and lasting effects on our faith as Christians and in our everyday life. Of course, we realize that it is a challenge today for many of us to cultivate this habit of reading, because we are being influenced by our modern communication technology, which is replacing many of the traditional things we have ever done. But we realize that reading still holds a very special place in our journey of faith and also in our growth as human beings. And we realize that even though we have a lot of information, access to the internet, we know that reading and learning through reading from books has a special effect on us, and especially on those who are young. So we continue that reading culture because the book is a beautiful companion to us, and it is one of the best inventions in human history and, of course, in the development of every human person. So today, in the Power of Reading program, we shall review a book that is called Skills for Counseling Young People. Skills for Counseling Young People, a Practical Approach. And this book is written by Mr. Michael Molone. Actually, he is deceased, but he's one of the best counselors that we have had around Kenya in the recent years. So he has written a book on skills of counseling young people. Actually, this is not an academic treatise. It's actually a very practical approach, as we see in the subtitle of this book that explains to us very clearly that this book actually is a book that can be in the hands of teachers, the book that can be in the hands of educators, of parents, of guardians, of people maybe in the religious field as pastors, priests, people who come into contact with young people and need from time to time to help them in their journey of life, to counsel them. But there are skills that are needed, and this book actually is one of a beautiful book that we can use, especially today where there are many challenges in terms of the society we are living in, and also in terms of what our young people have to put up with. Now, as we begin this program, The Power of Reading, and reviewing this book for today, Skills for Counseling Young People, a Practical Approach, I would like to say something that Mr. Michael Molone, the author, puts at the beginning of the book as part of his introduction. And he says that this book is for those who interact with and care for young people in any way, but particularly for those who work in the counseling departments in schools, colleges, and universities, and those who can learn to use counseling skills in their interaction with young people, such as teachers, administrators, lecturers, youth leaders, pastors, sports coaches, club patrons, medical staff, and so on and so forth. And this also includes the parents. And the word youth, he says in his introduction, that despite its being misused sometimes to include people up to the age of 40 with political aspirations, means, in the author's view, for him, he doesn't mean this idea that we have about youth as maybe the younger generation, but he wants to help us to see that the people he's trying to address in this book are those people beginning with teenage years to the early years of young adulthood and around the mid-20s. So, of course, we still have many people, even who are in their late 20s, who are still in school, because we have this increasingly prolonged education curriculum that can keep somebody so long in school. But this book is aimed at really what we mean when we say young people, meaning teenagers and young adults. And of course, he also acknowledges that today in the area of counseling, we have a lot of books. There's a profusion of books on counseling. and there are many textbooks that people read, especially if you have to be qualified in counseling. Now, this book is different, the book that we are reviewing. This is Skills of Counseling Young People. And according to the author, the purpose of this book is not really to obtain academic qualification, even though it can be very helpful. But the aim of the author is to put the counselor into contact with the one to be counseled, the young person. And of course, he also realizes, because he had a very deep experience in training people who are in counseling, and he says sometimes, especially in counseling departments, in schools, in colleges, in universities, some people who do certain types of work as maybe medical personnel or people who run sports clubs, other clubs for young people, religious leaders who interact with young people. Not everyone has received adequate training in counseling, and they may find themselves sometimes overwhelmed and bewildered by this experience of counseling. This includes also parents. And also sometimes, even if you are in a setting where you have an encounter with young people, even though one is not directly connected to the counseling department, sometimes one is forced to do some counseling, because young people will always come up with issues, or issues would arise, and as an older person to the young person, one needs to give some counseling. But it is important also not to mislead these young people, as the author says. And he outlines what is counseling and how counseling skills may be used and can sometimes make the process more helpful, because sometimes if you don't have the skills, even the one counseling can feel overwhelmed. But when the skills are there, it is possible to help the young people. Of course, he says some of the things that we need to counsel young people is a matter of common sense. But at the same time, there are other skills that are needed for the one who gives counseling to other people. So what he does is that he helps the reader, and he helps all of us. I believe this book will be very, very helpful to anyone who calls themselves an adult, to anyone who believes he or she is an example to a young person, to anyone who also aspires to mentor young people so that they can be able to navigate the challenges of life that every one of us, because we were all once young, have passed through. So we are going to take our first break, and then we shall come and continue reviewing our book, starting by seeing how this book is divided, what topics would a reader expect in this book, and also we shall randomly pick a few topics to see how the author has presented to us, to see how they can be useful to us. So let us take a break as we continue with the Power of Reading program here at Radio Maria, Nairobi. Listening to the Power of Reading program here at Radio Maria Nairobi, a Christian voice in your home. I am your host and presenter, Sister Beatrice from the Daughters of St. Paul, and today we are reviewing this wonderful and beautiful book, Skills for Counseling Young People, A Practical Approach by Mr. Michael Maloney. So we have already seen a bit of the introduction of this book. The purpose of this book is not really as a textbook. The author intended it to be a book that supports a person who is giving counseling, especially for those who may not have formal training, formal preparation, or intense preparation, because whoever is a teacher or in the medical field, or even a parent, at least there are moments where we have heard or people have a bit of a seminar on how to do counseling, but they are not really trained as a field or as a career. Now, this book is actually divided, first of all, into two parts. It's divided into two parts, and these parts are made up of 18 chapters. Now, part 1, which makes up chapters 1 to 10, deals with what we call counseling skills. So part 1 deals with counseling skills, and these are explained in 10 chapters. And part 2 deals with the counseling and particular issues, that is chapter 11 to 18. So there are some particular issues that the author has picked up and decided to present to the reader so that at least we can have some case scenarios of how one can handle this whole issue of skills of counseling the young people. Let's have an overview of what these chapters are about. So chapter 1 deals with the world of the adolescent and the young adult. Here the author explains what is the vision of the world for people at this age. Most of us are familiar with that because we have all gone through it, but of course times change and there are some variations that happen, especially in reaction to what people experience in the world. Chapter 2 deals with the meaning and place of counseling. Why should counseling be so important? Chapter 3 is understanding oneself and understanding another. So as a counselor, one has to understand oneself and also to be able to understand another person who is not like me. Then chapter 4, communication and counseling, how that works out. And then of course chapter 5, there is a client's story. So because counseling is geared towards helping another person, is very important to enter into that client's story. Then, of course, chapter 6 talks about making choices, because when you're helping young people, sometimes counseling can be hard because you have to help them to make choices, and some choices may not be pleasant. Of course, chapter 8 talks about cognitive behavior therapy, how you help a young person in terms of how they perceive the world, in terms of their reasoning, their thinking, their mind. Chapter 9 talks about group work, and chapter 10, counseling and ethics. That is the first part of this book that deals with what we call counseling skills. The second part that deals with counseling and particular issues, chapter 11 talks about sexuality and relationships. Chapter 12 is counseling and the world of the spirit. Chapter 13 is the balance between academic work and other activities. Many young people find themselves in the midst of academic work, and sometimes it can be a bit overwhelming for them, and they may end up doing certain things to relieve that pressure that they feel from education or academic activities, and they may find themselves in the wrong side of things. Then chapter 14 talks about addictions. Of course, addictions step in at this time because the young person is less and less supervised by the parents as compared to when they were children. Then chapter 15 deals with bullying, a very serious matter in our world today. We know that bullying is there, which is physical and it's happening in time, but sometimes also there's a lot of bullying that is going on the social media, in the internet, and actually it's affecting a lot of our young people. Then chapter 16 deals with the disability. There are instances where there is also disability in different ways. Then, of course, chapter 17 deals with depression, and chapter 18 deals with loss and grief, because also these are things that affect young people. Sometimes they lose their parents, sometimes they have a heartbreak, and they have to go through all these experiences that sometimes happen in life. So those are the divisions of this book. And actually listening to those topics, I'm sure, dear listener, you can realize that this book is actually very deep, very broad, very enlightening. Now, in chapter 1, the author introduces to us the world of the adolescents and the young adult. I would want just to read a few things that he has said there. He says that, first of all, one of the things that happens in the life of the young people, he says a lot, is that during the time of adolescence, there are changes and also there are challenges. So, and these changes and challenges come at different levels. The first level is biological. The second level is psychological. Third level is social. And fourth level is spiritual changes, which occur at this time. And when a young person is unable to face up to these things and deal adequately with them, these developmental changes, they may trigger certain negative consequences, and this is where counseling can help. Some young people are overwhelmed by these changes that occur in their lives. For example, he talks about biological changes and challenges, and he says that the genes which are inherited from parents can contribute to a person's physical appearance, for example, height or weight. And in addition, the changes which happen at puberty often occur at a different pace for different individuals and a different way for different individuals. And this is things that disturb young people, issues like when their body starts changing the shape of their breasts or genitalia. Some young people are very much disturbed. And when these changes look too different from those of others, there's a bit of helplessness, shame, and frustration which the individual adolescents experiences. And if they are not helped to understand that they don't need to be like other people, you might find that they may become withdrawn. They may acquire certain habits to compensate that feeling of inferiority, and that, of course, triggers many problems. And besides, when these things come about, if a bit of counseling, a bit of information is not given to these people, according to our author, he says, sometimes the youth are left to find out information from their peers, and today more and more from the media, where they even experiment with their own bodies, with their own lives, without realizing what they are doing. Now, he also talks about psychological changes and challenges, and the major challenge faced by an adolescent is about how to form a new and unique identity which enables one to have a sense of independence. Remember, this is the time that the young person, the teenager, the adolescent, the young adult is breaking free from that special supervision from the parents. So, of course, that comes with a lot of joy that you are left to your own, you are considered to be grown up enough. But at the same time, it brings up the challenge of how do I form a new and unique identity of myself? And so these are the things that sometimes they need to have a bit of guidance, because many young people tend to just imitate some social figures. Some may not be very positive. And when they're adjusting to these things, they might find themselves in great difficulties. Of course, there are also social changes and challenges. And this deals with the area of relationships, having meaningful relationships. They also discover they are attracted to the opposite sex, and this can bring certain challenges. And these things were not there when they were children. So it also comes with a lot of shame, a lot of being unsure, a lot of experimentation. And unfortunately, for most of the time when the young people grow up a bit, maybe they go to secondary school, the society expects them to have an adult and responsible behavior. So it becomes very difficult, even legally, when one turns 18. If one does something, he can be charged as an adult as compared to be charged as a juvenile. So sometimes also the expectations that are there from society can be overwhelming for the young person, because sometimes they are not sure of themselves, they are not clear. So they may need a bit of guidance, a bit of counseling, so that they can be able to make the right choices. Then, of course, there are spiritual developments and challenges. And here is where a young person also tries to search for meaning in their daily lives. They try to form their own beliefs, which are not sometimes necessarily those of their parents. And this can come out as rebellion against parental beliefs and thus result in conflicts. And of course, one of the dangers of this situation, the spiritual development and challenges, is there are many cults that are there, and the young people often are very vulnerable to these groups because they feel the people who guide these groups, they admire them, they are role models to them. And of course, this is the time adolescents often become attracted to the use of modern music. Even in church, they want to have a proper beat. and other ways of worship that may not even be necessarily spiritual fitting as far as their parents and other adults are concerned. And this, of course, creates a problem whereby they feel they are not fitting in that environment, and they end up sometimes even not going to church and all those kind of rebellions, because this is something that is happening to them. They are looking for an identity. They are looking for meaning that is even separate from their parents, because they are able now to have some independent thought, to realize that they have reached a certain level where they can take certain decisions, but they are not completely mature. And this is where, again, counseling comes in. And sometimes the author says people confuse rebuking somebody or warning a young person as counseling them. Those are two different things. And sometimes when people are too harsh and too judging and too condemning to these young people, what happens is that sometimes they become more and more withdrawn. And of course, there are other things that maybe they don't fit in these normal categories: biological, psychological, social, and spiritual. There are also challenges related to the management of the resources. And this comes to anything in terms of time. Before they didn't know what to do with their time, but now they want to meet their friends, they want to listen to music, they want to go out. So that management of those resources of time, the energy that they have, and also finances also brings a lot of challenges. So you have this conflict sometimes even with the parents. Some parents don't have enough resources, so it becomes a source of conflict with the young people. The young people want to go out and look for their resources. Of course, they're exposed to so many things. Other parents have a lot of resources, so they think that resources can replace the guidance that they need to give to their children. So majority of the people actually, even in adulthood, struggle with this, according to our author, that we struggle with our use of time, the use of energy, the use of the resources that we have. And many adolescents are noted for saying that they are bored or they are very unhappy, because sometimes they don't even know what to do with themselves. They have times in their hands that they may need counseling to be maybe encouraged to develop some hobbies or to acquire some hobbies, especially for youth who may live in urban areas where there is not much physical activity to be done as compared probably to the young people who may be in the rural areas, and it is easier for them to occupy their time. So this also needs counseling, as the author tells us in this book, so that these young people don't end up in this calling it bored, because even when they're saying they are bored, as a counselor or as a parent, a guardian, it means that this person actually is a bit lonely and confused. This is where the skills come in, so that the one talking to the young people is able to understand what is the deeper communication that this person is giving, besides saying they are bored or they are unhappy, they are tired. Maybe actually they are feeling lonely and confused. Then, of course, youth time also comes with the challenges related to communication. Many young people have poor verbal communication, and this actually can be very confusing for adults. And some adolescents just do not know what to say and how to say it. And at this developmental stage, useful information, advice, and other communication from parents or authority figures may be rejected, because sometimes one is not able to read these young people well. Of course, there are also the whole area of emotional and decision-making related challenges. So, of course, a young person, because of lack of experience, may have poor decision-making skills. Now, instead of condemning these young people, one has to develop skills to be able to listen to them and journey with them, so that they can be able to make these decisions, which sometimes are not the easiest. Otherwise, most of the young people just engage in unhealthy behavior, such as misuse of sex, drugs, alcohol, the internet, and so on. And these decisions that they take, that they feel can make them happy or fulfilled, in the end can become very difficult for them in their adult life. So the skill is needed, and we can see clearly that this is what our author is presenting to us here in Skills for Counseling Young People. And we have just had a brief overview of the first chapter that deals with the world of the adolescent and the young adult. Of course, I have not shared everything that the author has presented to us. In fact, in the end, even he separates these issues. He gives us even case studies here of what to do. He gives questions that one can share with friends and other people who are counseling. Let us now take a break so that we can continue to see what the author of Skills for Counseling Young People, a Practical Approach, Michael Moloney, tells us about the meaning and place of counseling, because it is not enough for us just to rush and start counseling people without knowing the meaning and place of counseling. Let us take a break as we continue with the Power of Reading program. You are listening to the Power of Reading program here at Radio Maria Nairobi, a Christian voice in your home. I am your host and presenter, Sister Beatrice from the Daughters of St. Paul. And today in our Power of Reading program, we are reviewing the book, Skills for Counseling Young People, a Practical Approach by Michael Moloney. And this book actually is meant to help anyone who comes into contact with young people, to help them to be able to negotiate the challenges and the changes that they are experiencing at this stage of their life. Let's just have an overview of chapter 2 that talks about the meaning and place of counseling, the meaning and place of counseling. And the author tells us that although the use of counseling is becoming increasingly common, there are still many misconceptions as to what it is and how it is to be used, and sometimes it is even overused as though it is a miracle cure. So not everything or every problem a young person has can be solved through counseling. And more frequently, it is underused because people fail to understand the nature of those problems where counseling can help, or help. The knowledge of counseling and the presence of counselors is actually lacking, or because of the stigma which is often attached to seeing a counselor. So there's also this idea, sometimes the counseling is confused, as the author tells us, but also there's a bit of stigma, because sometimes if you are going for counseling, it might be looked at as though one has failed in life. So only those people who have failed in life go to see a counselor, because remember, counseling is not just for young people. There is also counseling for adults. There is counseling for married couples. There is counseling for people maybe who may be having terminal illnesses. There is counseling for everyone. And that does not mean, according to our author here, that one of the meaning and place of counseling is to understand that counseling is not a sign of weakness. Actually, one going for counseling is actually a sign of strength. And he says counseling actually does not mean that somebody maybe is mentally unbalanced or somebody is suicidal. So he says that counseling should actually be put back to its place, because counseling is very, very important and useful for the growth of the human person, and especially for the young people that he targets in these things. Although he says that even though counseling does not mean that somebody has a mental illness, it means also counseling is something that helps to help a person to grow in their understanding of themselves, of the circumstances they are going through, and to help them make better decisions. So counseling also should help a person to have that positive mind and positive approach to life. And he says that when we use counseling skills, we are not professional counselors, but we are meant to be counselors because of the role or the work that we have. For example, if one is a teacher, automatically one has to once in a while put on counseling shoes. If one is a nurse or a pastor, a youth leader, even a human resource person, any helper, any person who deals with people needs these counseling skills. And he also enumerates for us in this book, in this chapter 2, what counseling is not. So he says counseling is not about giving advice, because advice is an opinion or suggestion about what somebody should do in a particular situation. So we have to not confuse counseling with advice. Now, while the counselor may not avoid giving information and making suggestions when they are really necessary, advice in itself is not counseling. For many people, one of the most difficult things to avoid in counseling is giving advice. Counseling is actually listening. Then counseling also is not merely questioning and obtaining information. There are people who are very good in interrogating young people. They get all the information. Questions are very important in counseling, but they are only asked in order to encourage the client to share, not to obtain facts. If it was 2 a.m. in the morning or 2 p.m. in the afternoon, that is not important. And a counselor is not a police officer or a teacher in charge of discipline. And even if one has those roles, you have to put them aside and be able to counsel a person without that person feeling threatened, judged, intimidated. He also says counseling is not having a discussion or a friendly conversation. So in a conversation, there is both speaking and listening, but there are also interruptions, possible disagreements, and the giving of viewpoint and advice. In theory, each person contributes about 50% of interaction. In counseling, the counselor listens and maybe speaks for 10 to 20% of the time. So the counselor should listen more than talk. You're not having a friendly conversation. You're not having a debate. You're not gisting, as we use that terminology today. Counseling is not just having a discussion or a friendly conversation. It is more than that. It is allowing the person to pour out what is in their mind. And we know that sometimes when we speak, we are able to think because we can see things as they are. And we also need that place where there is a bit of confidence, a bit of security where we can pour out ourselves. And also he says finally that counseling is not concerned with judging. A counselor is not to listen and hear maybe a young person engaged in a negative activity. You start telling them, that is a sin and this is happening. This is what will happen to you because you go. No, counseling is not judging. Counseling is not commanding. You can't tell the person, if I hear you have done that again, I'm going to beat you up. It's not moralizing, making the person even feel worse than they are feeling now. It's not even disciplining the person. And of course, this is particularly difficult for people who are in positions of authority as teachers, pastors, administrators, and parents. So using skills is very, very important. And that's why sometimes for counseling, it's advised, probably, especially the parents in some areas, the counseling should be given to another person because the parent has other roles. And even sometimes for certain teachers, they are not able to be good counselors because they are already the disciplinary teachers in the school. They make sure all the rules are observed. So it's very difficult for them to listen to a young person. And in the process of that sharing and counseling session, they may reveal that they broke some of these rules and it may turn into something else. Then he also helps us to see what is counseling then. If counseling is not all those things we have said, judging, commanding, moralizing, disciplining. He says that counseling is a relationship. Now, this relationship is a place, it's not a relationship as you'd have maybe just with a friend or a spouse. No, it is a relationship where there is a person who is able to give help to another person. And this relationship means that there should be a certain good percentage of trust between the two, that the client feels at ease with the counselor. If the client does not feel at ease with the counselor, then counseling might not be able to bear fruit. Then counseling is a process. So counseling is not something that can be done in a snap of a moment and it goes. No, counseling is a process. It has a beginning, it has a middle, it has an end. So it might need for some people to have counseling once a week, maybe for an hour, and that process starts taking place because you want this person to heal, you want this person to make a journey, you want this person to see things from a different point of view. So you cannot do that in 10-20 minutes. Then counseling should empower the client. So counseling has an optimistic view of the human nature, believing that by using the support and skills of the counselor, clients can become empowered to accept their reality and move towards greater freedom to make their own choices and to follow through by changing their outlook and behavior. Then counseling is about everyday life. Counseling is concerned with issues, problems, situations which lie within what we might call normal range of human activities. So it means that anything can be discussed in counseling. There's nothing small. You don't need to be the biggest drug addict in a town for you to go for counseling. Everything that happens in the person's life is part of counseling. Of course, counseling demands skills on the part of the helper. So the helper needs to have certain skills, how they are going to help this person, the setting of the counseling sessions themselves, to be able to map out at least how the journey is going to be with the person being counseled. It should not be just in a random manner. And he even tells us that he gives an example in this area of what counseling is. And he says that, for example, counseling can be done by different people within a setting. For example, he's giving us counseling in a school or college setting. So when you're in a school, nowadays, you know that every school and college is supposed to have a counseling department. So he gives the roles of the different people in the school in terms of making sure that this counseling goes on well. So he talks of things like counseling and the school principal. What is the school principal supposed to do to make sure that this counseling is done in an appropriate manner? Then, of course, counseling and the school administration. What is needed for counseling to take place? Do they need space? And do they need even sometimes to train those who are going to counsel the young people? So he gives all those scenarios, very, very helpful. You can find them in the book. It also talks about teachers and counseling. So it has to be understood what is the role of the teacher in counseling, which teacher can counsel and why. And of course, pupils themselves, how are they to be helped in this counseling situation? Because most of the students fear to go to have a chat with their teachers because usually the teachers are their disciplinarians. And how are they to enter into this whole cycle? So the school is supposed to create a whole cycle in terms of understanding their counseling department. The administration should be involved, the leadership should be involved, the teachers themselves, the students, how are they to be approached? How are even the students supposed to be guided to know how they can approach the whole area of counseling? And of course, it even talks about counseling and support staff in school. You know, in the school, you have a school matron, you have secretaries, you have cleaners, you have the kitchen staff, ground staff, security, and all that. Those people also should be involved in the counseling of these students. Maybe not in the session part, as the author says, but sometimes the support staff can help in referring students for counseling because sometimes they see certain behaviors in students that the parents or teachers may not be able to see. The author also brings in the figure of the parents and counseling because, of course, the children or the pupils, the students belong to a home. So it is very, very important also to bring in the parents into understanding the whole area of counseling because some parents, sometimes they even forbid their children to go for counseling or they tell them they shouldn't reveal certain family secrets because sometimes these are the things that create anxiety and the problems that arise in the young people. So they all have to be involved and to know that maybe whatever the young person is going to share will remain confidential. The family will not be embarrassed in any way because of what the young person may be able to share just in terms of growing and understanding themselves. Then, of course, there's also the local community, because sometimes some behaviors that have to be corrected are manifested in the community. Maybe the community sees some students running truant, some students engaging in certain activities like alcohol taking or having these parties that are now very, very common that sometimes end up into sexual orgies. So it is very, very important to bring in the whole community. And I think this is one of the beautiful aspects of this book, that it helps us to understand that in counseling also it's very, very important to bring in the community. Of course, I can say a lot about this book, Skills for Counseling Young People. I want to leave it there for today. And I hope, dear listener, you'll be able to get a copy of this book, which you can get from any of our Pauline bookshops. And also you can be able to get it online if you visit www.paulinesafrica.org. And you make sure that you also get this book. Encourage teachers, parents, and all those who deal with young people to get a copy of this book. So for today, that is what we had for you in the Power of Reading program. I take this opportunity to thank our ever-faithful, ever-present studio technician, Mr. Timothy Morethi, who recorded and continues to record the Power of Reading programs here at Pauline's Studio, Nairobi. Thank you very much, Mr. Morethi, for your beautiful work. And for now, until next week, dear listener, I encourage you to continue reading, continue encouraging others to read so that we can grow this culture and habit of reading. I've been your host and presenter, Sister Beatrice from the Daughters of St. Paul.
You have been listening to the Power of Reading program. Join us next week as we continue discovering the wonderful world of books. This program is prepared for Radio Maria Nairobi and presented to you by the Daughters of St. Paul.